Chapter 14. As Sam Salone stepped gauntly out of the Barrios ranch house into bright morning sunlight, his rakish hat lifted off his head apparently of its own volition and sailed off majestically to land 10 feet away in the dust. He made an ineffectual grab at it and crouched suddenly at the significance of the strange occurrence that lately dawned on him and then sprang back into the door. Wiping his mouth on a rumpled sleeve, having just finished his morning coffee, Ezra turned to stare at his partner, his single eye piercing as he caught the faint crack of a distant rifle. "What in the thunder was that?" he rasped alertly. Meeting his glance, Sam gestured outside significantly. "Visitors," was his tense response. "Somebody who took me for you, I wouldn't wonder. Anyway, he don't seem to like us." Ezra rolled it over for 10 seconds, growling in his throat. "Good creeps, that can't be Taggart, paying his compliments already." Grabbing up an old companion hat of his own, Ezra moved over to a door opposite of the one from which Sam had stepped and cautiously eased its brim round the sill like a man peeping. Promptly there was a dull thud as a slug lodged into the logs of which the structure was composed not far from his hand. Ezra straightened and scratched his grizzled thatch of hair. "Dang poor shot," he grumbled. "Missed it 400 or 500 yards like that." His satire was meant to convey precisely the opposite meaning, for few folks, even in a land where all men handled guns more or less familiarly, could have done as well. Sam got the point without any trouble. "Well, he didn't miss mine," he grumbled. "It's out there in the ground with a hole in her where you could put your fist through it." A thoughtful expression overspread his pudgy features, causing the bushy black brows to twitch. "Hey, Ez, supposing not to be part of the Galloway's tough crew, what would the hombres want with us?" "Why, they—" Ezra broke off, arrested. His look was suddenly that of an aroused eagle. "Shucks, they wouldn't have had the gall to make a play for our horses," he said explosively. "Maybe not, but I wouldn't put a bet on her and expect to collect on it." Ezra knew he was right. It was strictly in line with what had already happened from the flag outfit to show its hand sooner or later in such a brazen boldness. Mace Galloway was growing in power of late, and he was in solid with Sheriff Lawler as one of the more important businessmen of the valley. Doubtless Mace felt confident of his ability to divert any serious threat to the lawless gang he headed, no matter how raw their depredations. Ezra was just now more painfully conscious of the score or more of unusually fine roan horses being held on the south pasture. An outlaw crew on the make might well be calculating to covet such a haul. There was a little doubt in the mind of either partner that this was the true object behind the surprise morning attack. Rifle in hand, Sam was peering through the chinks betwixt the logs on the west side of the cabin. "There's somebody out there on the slope," he muttered. "Can't make out much." His rifle crashed a moment later. Ezra had taken down his own and was doing his best to locate a target. He moved out into a lean-to shed that adjoined the ranch house and was making for the open side when a spent slug rattled amongst the loose kindling piled at his side. Ezra started and swore. Withdrawing back to the door, he called over his shoulder. "Watch it there, Runt. They're on 2 sides of us." The fact eliminated any possibility of chance in the manner of this systematic siege. Both read the determined design behind the attack. They were being pinned here inside the ranch house for as long as it suited the outlaws, or even wipe them out. "They're closing in," Sam announced, levering a cartridge into a fired chamber. They won't have no particular luck trying to take us by storm, though. Despite the cottonwoods shading the yard and giving the place a pastoral air, the ranch house had been built by original plan in the center of an open flat, which rendered close approach virtually impossible without observation. But in the present case, defense wasn't their sole concern. "We'll better make our play while there's time," remarked Sam. "Is there any chance of smoking 'em out once we get some horse flesh under us?" "Well, so far I've counted 5 of them buzzards, and more seems to be showing up. I don't know how many you feel like taking on." "Well, we'll just say they take the pot," Sam grinned. "It's a heap easier that way." Despite the levity, it was the greatest reluctance that Salone faced the necessity of abandoning the ranch, even should they be enabled thus to slip away unscathed. But he had since long learned to accept an unescapable fact as such, and he did not vacillate it now. "What you aiming to try?" he asked. Ezra shrugged. "Well, if we can gather them broncs and flog 'em out of here, that'd be something." Sam made no comment. Ready as he was to try any desperate expedition, still he was somewhat flabbergasted by this rapid-fire events. "We've got stock run off at night and a cute trick or two pulled on us," he groused. "This is the first time I ever knowed a bunch of crooks to just come riding right in after our broncs, and pretty confident of getting 'em." "Well, they might get 'em yet if you don't get a hump on you," his lanky companion retorted unfeelingly. Sam snorted. "Ah, bugger off, Longlegs," he snapped. "I'll run them as far as I can and then start a-rolling." Having backed away from the door, Winchester in hand, Ezra started fast and was running as tight as he could go by the time he burst through the door. Sam followed suit. So close was the watch kept on the house as the besiegers closed in that they had not covered more than a dozen yards before dust was puffing up by their flying feet. The crack of rifles could be heard distinctly now, but the marksmen were yet too far away to have any luck in firing at the running figures. Reaching a corral, Ezra kicked the bars flying, darted inside, and swarmed round the back of a surprised horse before it could guess what would happen. The animal reared and came down pounding. Ezra took time, mounted bareback as he was, to crowd several other ponies into a corner, where Sam, despite his shorter legs, had no great difficulty in procuring a mount. "Haze 'em down to the pasture," called Ezra, wincing as his rifle slugs buzzed by his head in an invisible malice. The outlaws had been quickly seen what was afoot and were doing their best to break it up. Shoving the half-dozen saddle horses before them, the partners were clattering down the lane. Their roan herd could be seen, scattered about the wide pasture, pointed ears pricked up and head turned towards them as the spirited animals sent swift action. "Work 'em towards the gate," Sam yelled, sweeping wide on his pony. "We'll be coming fast in a couple minutes." He was good as his word. Ezra barely had time to swing the pasture gate back when the thunder of pounding hooves and the roan swept forward, close bunched, and manes flying and tails flying like banners. Out on the open range they flashed, traveling at express train speed. Sam and Ezra clung close to their flanks, knowing full well that the thieves would likely to think twice before firing directly upon those magnificent brutes, regardless of the provocation. Through the dust of their swift passage, Ezra was using his single eye to good advantage. It didn't take him long to find the weak spot in the concord being drawn about them. "Swing 'em north," he bawled. It was not easy, for the roans were taking the bit in their teeth at a speed that none but their own breed could have matched. Lead sang over the heads as the raiders raced out to head them off. Sam spied 6 or 7 renegades breaking into the open at an alarmingly close range, all bent over turning the racing herd. But the animals were not to be turned this time. "Right on through!" Sam yelped with a shrill cowboy yell. His own gun was spitting, and one of the racing outlaws tumbled from his mount with a broken shoulder. It angered the others, making a determined bid to block off the flight of coveted horses. They all but allowed themselves to be run down. Still, it was without effort. 3 minutes later, and the Barrios roans were through their barricades and running free. Neither Ezra nor Sam had sustained a scratch. "They're going to be flogging after us, as nervy as they are," Sam warned, looking back through the broiling dust. "Is that supposed to be news?" the lanky man barked. "We're getting out fast as we can. It wouldn't be healthy for 'em to crowd us too close, and I reckon they might have caught on." Shoving the roans along, by common consent they struck across the hills toward Pat Stevens' lazy mare range. Once beyond the restraint of fences, the meddlesome animals clattered through the brush at a greater rate. Ezra dropped back once to run the rear, and Sam heard the crack of his rifle. 5 minutes later, the big tracker caught up once more. "Are you still coming?" Sam asked. "Checking on where we're heading for, anyway," returned Ezra. "I slowed 'em up a bit, but we can't hope to shake 'em off." Half an hour later, skirting around the slopes, they came into sight of Lazy Mare headquarters, and they drove straight towards the ranch, and the herd poured into the yard in a swirl of dust. Pat came hurrying out of the storage shed, where he had been rummaging, attracted by the sudden racket. He flashed a grin at the dirt-grimmed partners, at the same time admiring the frisky roans. "It's a good bunch of stock there, boys, but I could have said as much over at your place and saved you the trouble driving 'em over." The smile faded from his jaws as Ezra gruffly acquainted him with what had occurred that morning. Reading its significance in a flash, he made an expressive gesture, an indication of impatience, resignation, and hardened resolve. "Well, it's come sooner than I expected," he remarked briefly. "The chances are good that I'll feel the pinch too. Give me a couple minutes to get up a bronc there, boys. We can at least tuck the roans away into a safe place." With less than time mentioned, he jogged out of the corral astride a trim buckskin pony. "Get out your shotgun there, Krusty, and keep a watch over the place," he called out to Hodge, who was gaping at them from the porch. The old rawhider waved in understanding, fierce alertness in his manner. The 3 horsemen started the Barrios horses out of the yard, and in a moment they were on the move again at a fast clip. "Where to?" Ezra demanded, looking across the bobbing backs at Pat. Head for the creek," was the answer. "We'll turn east there and then break trail just in case, and then we'll head for the Pinnacle Rocks." Reaching the shallow stream presently, they turned the horses up its course and followed it for half a mile before Pat indicated a place where they could turn out into a rocky ground. By a devious course, leaving a minimal of sign behind them, they found themselves at the pinnacles. Ragged lava spirals, jumbles of rock rose out of the center of the little valley, which plentiful feed would virtually ensure against the straying of stock, even without a guard being kept. Here the roans were allowed to slow and spread out, and they presently fell into grazing. Ezra looked back towards the south, an expression of satisfaction on his gaunt face. "Well, that ought to hold 'em for a while. I don't know, but it fooled me to follow our sign here if I didn't know." "Well, you'll be all right here. But I don't like this business any bit, with Galloway tearing loose all over the place. Jess Lawler ought to be notified at once. Not that he'd believe the evidence of his eyes. We'll just have to rub his nose in the facts till he can't see beyond reason. Well, I'll ride into town right off and get either Jess or Roof Dad on the job, Sam proposed. Well, that's a good idea. Pat paused. I'll stick around with Ez for a while just to be on the safe side, but we always got Johnson and the rest of my crew to depend on if we get in a pinch. It was so arranged, Sloane pulling away a few minutes later and striking a safely roundabout course through the hills towards town. Pat and Ezra kept a watch from high ground, and though they saw a rider several miles away once or twice through the afternoon, no one came to the pinnacles. Early dusk found the two friends seated at the base of the rocks, talking the situation over. Well, there's no telling what luck Sam will be having, Sam was saying, but it's unlikely now that Lawler or Dad'll show up here before morning. Well, I'll keep watch, Ezra nodded. Sam might be back with some news. And if he isn't, Pat caught up him, you won't eat unless we do something about it. Why not ride into the ranch with me tonight? No, I'll stay here. Through Pat was reasoning with him, Ezra was adamant, and it was finally decided that he should ride the mile or two to Pat's Box Springs line camp, where he could pick up something to eat from the stock of supplies that was kept there while Pat awaited his return. The big fella rode away on this errand, and he was back after dark, and after a few minutes further talk, Pat set out alone for his own ranch, more than a little curious to know whether the flag raiders had made the effrontery to show up there. The faint possibility that even now they might still be lingering about caused him to approach the ranch house an hour later with considerable care. Not seeing or hearing anything out of the ordinary, he turned his horse quietly into a corral and made for the house. A faint light in the kitchen announced that Krusty Hodge was there waiting, and verifying the fact by means of a glance through the window, Pat started for the door. Just as he swung the door back to enter, one of its upper panels gave forth a loud and startled thump, not unlike the thud of a drum, and out of the corner of his eye he saw flying splinters. Pat leapt through, dodged aside in the same motion, and slammed the door shut in a hurry. Old Krusty stood in the middle of the floor staring at the table, where the unheralded slug had smashed a pan and ruined it in the process. "What in the tarnation?" he snarled in shrill wrath. "They're on our backs," exclaimed Pat warningly. "Get out of the light, Krusty. You haven't seen or heard anything till now?" Hodge's negative was profane. "How in Dunket do you expect me to see anything in the pitch dark?" he began. A second slug smashed the window and fluttered past his face, causing him to break off abruptly and dive for shelter behind the stove. "Hang it, Stephen, this is all your fault," he raged. "You gone out of your way to be making enemies of them birds, and this is what you be getting." Pat was well aware of their predicament, as still more bullets drove into the house from the cover of darkness outside. Crawling to a gun rack, he lifted a carbine for himself and another for Krusty, but it was mainly a gesture of preparedness in the event that the outlaws mounted a direct assault, for, as the old man had said, little enough could be seen now. The late moon wouldn't be up for hours if it indeed showed itself at all this night. "Douse the light," Pat directed, the muttering handyman being closest to it by a number of feet. "Least we can do is make it hard as possible for 'em to see what they're shooting at." Krusty complied. The light blinked out, plunging the entire house into glum darkness. The shape of its silhouette must have been plain enough for the killers outside, for their slugs continued to thud into the clapboard walls, most of them continuing on through and whining about the kitchen in lethal fragments.
"Dang it, Pat, they'll get us even here on the floor."
Hudge burst out in fury as a sailing splinter gouged a furrow in his leathery cheek.
"I reckon our only chance is to crawl out the back door and try and slip away."
"No, we won't be driven to do that." Pat's tone was sober. "You take her easy, old top. If it gets worse, of course, we'll have to come up with something. But I'll be damned if I'm driven out of my own home by them blacklegs, even if they are making a sev of it." As the minutes passed and the fire grew hotter, if anything, rattling outside in the darkness in perfect fuselage, it grew apparent to Stevens that the men out there were intent on getting him. Doubtless, they were under orders this time to make a job of it, and it looked as though they might just succeed. End of chapter 14.